we have Aman-Ra Mashariki, who's a new arrival at Esri. As a guy who is a product of New York City over most of his life, he's now finds himself in Redlands, California. He also has a very impressive background on the integrating fields of technology and public life. His background is having a BS and an MS in computer science and then a PhD in engineering. And then he worked in national government as a White House fellow, which you know is a great honor, and as the chief technology officer for the Office of Personnel Management. Recently, for nearly 3 years, he was the chief analytics officer for New York City. And what he's going to tell us about is using some of the lessons of applying data with action of various sorts in the nation's largest city, and what implications from the lessons that he has seen there might apply in other parts of the world, other forms of enterprises, and in civic betterment generally. So please join me now in welcoming Aman-Ra Mashariki.
Jim, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Jim. Appreciate it. As mentioned, I'm new to Esri for about a month and a half or so. And I came from New York, and I was the chief analytics officer at New York City. And I also served as the director of the mayor's office for data and analytics. And what that means, the way I like to describe that is, we were known as MODA. We were a no-cost analytics consulting firm to the city of New York. So what that meant was mayor, deputy mayors, agency heads, commissioners would reach out to my office and say, hey, we have specifically an operational challenge that we would like to partner with your office to help us build a solution to. And so today, I want to talk to you about one of those operational challenges that we partnered with city agencies to take on, and then ultimately some of the things that we learned from that engagement. So the summer of 2015, New York City was stricken with an outbreak of Legionnaires, specifically in the South Bronx area. Now, the Department of Health did their job perfectly. They went in, quarantined the area, engaged the people that were impacted and affected by this, but they also found out how Legionnaires was spreading in that area. And what they found was that it was spreading through cooling towers that sat on top of buildings, and there was mist coming from these cooling towers that was spreading Legionnaires, bacteria. Because of this, City Council in New York City moved rapidly to pass a law that said anyone who owned a building that had a cooling tower on top of it had to both register that cooling tower with the city and then get it cleaned. And the mayor signed that law into action. And you had 1 month to be compliant. The fines were upwards of $25,000 if you were not compliant. So after this law was passed, we still had a month before you had to be out of compliance. But the city, we couldn't wait for people to voluntarily clean and register their cooling towers. Reason being is, if during that time another person got sick or another person died because of Legionnaires, then it would be our fault. So the mayor brought all of his leaders together in City Hall and had one question: where are all of the cooling towers in the city of New York? Right? And so he brought together a canvassing and outreach operation that included my team and said, go forth and find every single cooling tower in the city of New York. Now, what's complex about that question is, we had never in New York City ever managed cooling towers for any reason. So we had to figure out how to do this. So what I'm going to walk you through is what the daily operation of this 3.5-week effort looked like. When I say daily, minus Sundays, this was our operation. This was about a 16 to 18-hour day, every single day. And I'll also add that I had a team at the time of 5 people. So I'll start from the top right. So my office would use an algorithm, a machine learning algorithm, to identify buildings in New York City that were likely to have a cooling tower on top of it. And we created these lists to give to the agencies that were doing the outreach. So the agencies that were doing the outreach were 311. So instead of people calling 311 with service requests, we turned it into a call center. So they were getting on the phone every single day, all day, calling people and asking them, do you have a cooling tower? Other agencies were Department of Buildings, New York City Emergency Management, Department of Health, and the Fire Department. So we would give them lists around 9 a.m. in the morning. We would give them a list for them to then use to do their canvassing and outreach. And whenever I tell this story, I always like to add that there was this particular interesting thing that happened the first day that we created a list and gave them to the agencies. We gave a list of about 60,000 buildings, likely buildings in New York City that had cooling towers, to the fire department. And they looked at the list, and in about 20 minutes, they said, well, we can scratch off 20,000 from this list. We don't have to do those 20,000. And they explained to us that there is not a cooling tower on a building that is under 7 stories. And they knew this from their operational work on a daily basis. And I always tell that story to say, one thing we knew at Moda, and we learned time and time again, and saw it time and time again, that data and analytics doesn't solve your problem. Data and analytics matched with the people who have been doing that job in the city for years and decades is where you really identify value. So you always have to rely on the capability and the intellect of the people that are in that city. And so once they get these lists in the morning, they do their outreach. The outreach and canvassing effort usually ended around, I would say, 11 o'clock p.m. that night. Right? And then that's when the data from the outreach would come back to my office. And so we would compile that data, we would clean it, we would validate it, we would verify, we would tabulate it, and then we would create these reports. On this screen is a clock, and the clock specifically says 5:30, because that's the time that I told my team they had to get me the report from the previous day's canvassing and outreach no later than 5:30 a.m. So usually they were good at getting it to me about 3, 4 a.m. in the morning, right, once they got the data tabulated. And then I would look at it. So I always told them every single day for 3.5 weeks, I'm the last person to get eyes on this report that has to go to the mayor daily, right? And so around 6:30, after I checked the reports, I validated against the prior day's outreach and canvassing efforts just to see if we're moving positively, negatively, if there are certain things wrong, some things don't match up. And then I would send to the mayor, first deputy mayor, and city commissioners of the canvassing agencies, usually around 6:30, 7 o'clock a.m. I can tell you the scariest phone call, there's 2 phone calls that I've ever gotten in my life that are the scariest. And both of them were usually around 6:45 a.m. And he comes in and says, hello, is this Ahmed? Yes. He says, well, hold for the mayor, please. That's usually because there was something on that report that he didn't like and he was concerned about. And those were the scariest phone calls that I had during this 3.5 sprint. Once the leaders of the canvassing efforts got the reports, we would meet. And we would always meet every day in City Hall. And we would discuss what's the strategy for the next day. And then when I left that, I would go back to the office and I would sit with my team and say, how do we revise the model today to make sure it meets the strategy that we had to put forth for the canvassing effort that's coming? Right? And so this happened for 3.5 weeks, every single day, at about 16 to 18 hours a day. And this was our outreach effort. Remember I said the mayor had one question. Where are all of the cooling towers in the city of New York? But let me add some specifics, some characteristics, and some requirements to that request. One, there's over 1 million buildings in the city of New York. Another is you have limited human and financial resources with which to do your outreach. Another requirement is that accuracy and expediency is crucial, and this is why. We did a very successful and a very powerful and strong outreach effort, and we found thousands upon thousands of cooling towers in this process. But if we had missed one cooling tower, if we did not identify one cooling tower, and that cooling tower then became infected with Legionnaires and then harmed a New Yorker, well, we didn't do our job. No matter how many cooling towers we found, if we missed one, we didn't do our job. So precision was key. Now, with all of that being said, if I told you without data and analytics, there was a 1 in 10 chance of you identifying a cooling tower, but with data and analytics, there was 8 in 10 chances of you identifying a cooling tower to a building. Which would you invest in? It's a rhetorical question. So we did a lot of things correct. We missed the mark on very many as well. So we had a number of postmortems after this effort, all of the agencies, and we sat and we thought about what are the things that we did good that we need to shore up, or what are the things that were missing? So I'm going to share with you 6 key pieces that came out of these postmortems, specifically around the data and analytics teams. The first one is always translate a city question into a clearly defined analytics problem. The city question was, where are all of the cooling towers in the city of New York? The defined data and analytics problem was, how can we use data and analytics to support the city canvassing efforts? Always 2 separate things. Access to city data and ascertain its provenance, its history, and its quality. One of the things we always said at MODA was bad data is just as good as no data, right? So you always had to ensure you had quality data. Use data, and we've heard this throughout the day, which I was really excited to hear. Use data and analytics as a mechanism to create more informed decision makers in your organization. Again, data and analytics doesn't solve the problem. It supports and adds value to the people in your organization or in your city or in your county that do solve the problem. The way I like to describe MODA's role in this effort was looking for cooling towers in the city of New York was like looking for a needle in a haystack. MODA's job wasn't to find the needle. Our job was to burn down the haystack, to make it easier for the people who were actually doing the job to find the needle. Constant and consistent ground truthing. That previous slide that I showed you with that daily life cycle that we had, it was incredible, and it was of utmost value to us that every single day we had people coming back to us telling us, yes, you sent us to some buildings that we already went to last week, or you sent us to this area. Every single day we had people taking our list and giving us feedback, ground truthing what our algorithms were doing. And so we were always able to be agile and respond to that. You cannot do an analytic and then throw it over the fence and say, good luck with your operations. Constant and consistent ground truthing is important. Along those lines, communicate, right? The analytics teams must be speaking to each other, and they must be speaking to the people who are out in the field, and then we all must be speaking to the leaders and the directors. There has to be consistent communication. And then lastly, and this is what we did with MODA, was embed the data scientist teams with the domain experts. So when I told you that we would create these lists and give them to the canvassing agencies, folks from MODA went physically to the canvassing agencies, stayed with them for the day, learned how they did their jobs, engaged with them, talked to them, learned from them, and at the end of the day, that's when they came back to headquarters, MODA's office, and then tabulated the data. But they were with the domain experts all day long. So when the smoke cleared, the first deputy mayor for New York City requested to have a meeting with me. And he said, good job. The leadership in New York City rarely got excited about much. I said, decent job, but I'm concerned. I'm concerned that the next time there's an emergency, and there will be a next time, that effort that you guys just did is not sustainable. We can't repeat that. We can't repeat that for so many reasons. We can't take folks from the fire department and have them canvass the city every time there's an emergency, right? Because they have to respond to fires. They have a job to do. So do the other agencies. He said, but my concern is that there are things in this city that we don't know about. It's the unknown unknowns about New York City that are going to hurt us. So you've got, true story, you've got a week and a half to 2 weeks to figure out how we can wrap our arms around the unknown unknowns in the city of New York. So I made a couple of phone calls, called some of my colleagues across other cities, chief data officers, and called some of my friends in the federal government, reached out to some of my friends in academic institutions, and tried to get some of the most innovative and incredible ideas about how do I gather information and so on and so forth. True story, someone handed me an Excel spreadsheet. And on that Excel spreadsheet had a list of 26 agencies in New York City. And each one of those agencies had an Esri server that they were using for internal operational analytics and engagement, meaning they were using Esri to do the mission of the organization. So a light went off. I said, if these agencies, all of these agencies in New York City are using this technology for their internal mission, so why don't we figure out a way to connect it all such that when there has to be a citywide engagement, which is usually when my office comes into play, that data can be surfaced and integrated and shared across these agencies. And so we reached out to Esri. Esri has a strong presence in New York City, so we reached out to Esri and we said, work with us on a proof of concept to see if we can do this. And I said, okay, and we worked with them, and this is the conceptual idea that we thought of, this citywide intelligence hub in New York City that I'm happy to say is still moving aggressively. But we didn't want to stop with a proof of concept or a conceptual idea. What we decided to do was what my office created in partnership with the New York City Emergency Management Office, this concept called data drills. So we started doing data drills towards the end of last year, and we would do them every single month. And what a data drill is you get data leaders across the agencies to come to a room, physically, literally come together, sit down, and you present them with a scenario, an emergency response scenario. And you've got 2 days, and we're timing it, and we're tracking it, we're setting benchmarks. You've got 2 days to respond to this fake emergency scenario that is real. So for instance, the first data drill, the scenario was, there's a blackout in Brooklyn. The analytics question was, which areas in Brooklyn, New York, that have buildings that have elevators are likely to have those elevators stuck, and specifically what type of people would get hurt on those elevators. For instance, high level of people with disabilities, people who are infirmed living in these buildings, and then how do we set the emergency response vehicles such that they can respond to the high priority areas first with respect to these stuck elevators. I was just reading this morning, there was a newspaper article in Los Angeles. There was a blackout in Los Angeles because there was a fire in one of the energy plants, and there was a blackout, and there were people stuck in elevators. Like, that's a very real thing, and we did a scenario to test that, and we used the Citywide Intelligence Hub, Esri's platform, to have agencies all come together and share data. And our very most recent one, before I left, we had a data drill that brought together over 122, I think the first one was like 15 or 16 folks, over 122 folks in New York City, data and analytics leaders across New York City, across 22 agencies. And we did a scenario using the Citywide Intelligence Hub. And so this was a case of, if we only knew then what we know now. And I can tell you New York City is smarter, more capable, and more efficient in emergency response. In conclusion, this is one of the reasons why I'm here, and that is to identify these processes, methodologies, and frameworks and capabilities that we've used in New York and begin to share them across countries and cities here in the States as well. And so I want to thank you very much for your time.